Long ago, in the prosperous village of Konsole, there lived a man named Adeoti. He was the wealthiest trader in the land, known for his vast cocoa farms, caravans of goods, and a house so grand that even the king admired his beauty. But Adeoti was a man of pride, unyielding, cold, and full of contempt for those he deemed beneath him. His wife Morenike was the daughter of a humble herbalist. She was kind-hearted, gentle, and wise. But Adeoti despised her. He had only married her because the oracle had warned him that his worth would wither if he did not take a wife from the lineage of healers. But despite her presence in his home, he never treated her with affection. She was just another possession like his land and gold, useful but unwanted. One season, during a long journey to a neighboring kingdom, Adeoti's caravan was ambushed by a group of ruthless bandits. His guards were slain, his treasures stolen, and he was left for dead in the wilderness, bleeding under the scorching sun. Back in Konsole, when news of the attack reached the village, many assumed Adeoti had perished. His kinsmen mourned, but none dared to search for him, none except Morenike. Defying the warnings of the elders, she wrapped herself in a simple cloth, took her father's medicine bag, and ventured into the unknown. She followed the paths traders often took, asking travelers and hunters if they had seen a man fitting her husband's description. Days passed, and still she pressed on. Finally, deep in the heart of the forest, she found him. His once proud body was battered and frail, his breast shallow. Flies hovered around his wounds, and fever burned his skin. Morenike did not hesitate. She crushed herbs between her palms, pressing them against his wounds. She tore the cloth from her own body to bind him. Then, with all her strength, lifted him onto her back. She carried him through the forest step by step, ignoring her own hunger and exhaustion. She walked through the night, guided only by the moon, until at last she reached the village. For weeks, Morenike nursed him. She fed him with her own hands, bathed his body, and sang to him when his fever made him restless. Slowly, Adeoti began to recover. His strength returned, and the people of Konsole praised Morenike's courage. But Adeoti did not rejoice. Instead, he burned with quiet rage. Every time he saw her, he felt his pride crumble. A woman he had despised, had been the one to save him. He, Adeoti the Great, now owed his life to the one he had looked down upon. One evening, as Morenike placed a bowl of steaming soup before him, he stared at her with cold, ungrateful eyes. "I did not ask you to save me," he said. His voice was sharp, filled with resentment. Morenike's hands trembled, but she did not reply. She simply looked at him, her eyes filled with something he could not understand. From that night, Adeoti refused to eat the food she cooked. He stopped speaking to her, treating her like a shadow in his house. When the villagers praised her, he only felt bitterness. And when she sat beside him in the evenings, as she always had, he would rise and walk away. But Morenike said nothing. She simply watched as if she knew something he did not. And in the silent nights of Konsole, as the moons bathed the land in silver light, Adeoti found himself lying awake, unable to escape the weight of his own heart. For many months, Morenike endured Adeoti's silent scorn. She continued to cook his meals, tend to his wounds, and carry out her duties as a wife. But her heart grew heavy. The man she had risked her life for treated her as though she had committed a terrible crime. One evening, as the harmattan wind blew through the village, drying leaves and cracking the earth, Adeoti sat outside his grand house, staring into the distance. The villagers moved about their business, whispering about how a man could hate the very woman who had saved him. As Morenike approached with a calabash of water, Adeoti turned to her with cold eyes. "Why did you not let me die?" he asked, his voice bitter. Morenike froze. For a moment, she thought she had misheard him, but the look on his face told her he meant every word. "I would rather have met my end in the wilderness than be in your debts," he continued. "Now every time I see you, I am reminded of my weakness." A sharp pain spread through Morenike's chest, but she swallowed it. She looked at him for a long moment, then placed the calabash beside him and walked away without a word. From that night, she stopped trying. She no longer waited for him at mealtimes. She no longer asked if he was well. She became a ghost in her own home, moving silently through the halls, speaking only when spoken to. At first, Adeoti felt relief. He thought he had won, but soon an unfamiliar emptiness settled in his chest. The house felt colder. The evenings felt longer. He would lie awake expecting to hear Morenike's soft footsteps, her gentle humming, but there was only silence. Then one morning, something unexpected happened. Adeoti woke up to find that Morenike was gone. Her side of the bed was empty, her belongings missing. The fragrance of her presence had faded like the last breath of a dying flame. Adeoti's heart pounded. He called for the servants, demanding to know where she had gone, but no one had seen her leave. He stormed through the village, but the people only shook their heads. No one had seen Morenike. Days passed, then weeks, and still she did not return. And for the first time, Adeoti felt something he had never allowed himself to feel before. He felt fear. Adeoti's fear grew with each passing day. He searched every corner of Konsole, sending messengers to nearby villages, but Morenike was nowhere to be found. His once proud house felt hollow, the grand meals tasted like ash, and the silence that had once given him power now tormented him. Then one fateful night, as the moon hung full and bright over Konsole, a stranger arrived at Adeoti's home. It was an old woman, her back bent with age, her eyes sharp like the blade of a hunter's knife. "I bring a message," she croaked, "from the one you have cast aside." Adeoti's heart pounded, but he masked his anxiety with his scowl. "Where is she?" he demanded. The old woman chuckled, a dry, airy sound. "She walks a path the gods have chosen for her, and soon she will be beyond your reach." Before Adeoti could press for answers, the woman reached into her cloth bag and pulled out a single delicate bead, one that had once adorned Morenike's waist. She dropped it in his palm. "Find her if you dare," she whispered, before disappearing into the night like a wisp of smoke. Adeoti clutched the bead, his mind racing. Where had Morenike gone? And what did the old woman mean by beyond your reach? Desperate for answers, he sought out Yeye Ifa, the village diviner. She sat beside her shrine, the scent of burning herbs thick in the air, her cowrie shears laid out in patterns only she could understand. "You have made an enemy of faith," she murmured without looking up. "The woman you scorned was never meant to be yours forever. She was a gift and you have thrown her away." Adeoti's chest tightened. "Where is she?" he asked, his voice unsteady. Yeye Ifa sighed. "Morenike has crossed the river of the lost, a place where few return. The spirits have taken notice of her suffering. She is now under their watchful eye." Adeoti stiffened. The river of the lost, Odo Ono, was no ordinary place. It was said to be a realm between the living and the dead, a place where spirits tested the souls of the abandoned and broken. Had Morenike truly gone? And if she had gone, was it too late to bring her back? Determined, Adeoti set out at dawn, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and something else, something he refused to name: regret. The journey was perilous. The forest whispered with unseen voices. The air grew heavy and his own guilt seemed to weigh him down like a boulder. But he pressed on, pushing past his exhaustion until at last he reached the river bank. And there, standing at the water's edge, was Morenike. But she was not alone. Beside her stood a figure cloaked in white, his face hidden in shadow. Adeoti's breath caught in his throat. The figure turned slightly, and though it had no eyes, he felt his gaze pierce through him. "Why have you come?" The voice was neither male nor female, kind nor cruel. It was ancient, powerful. Morenike did not turn to face him. She simply stood there silent as if waiting for something. Adeoti swallowed hard. He had risked everything to find her, but now standing before the unknown, he realized he had no idea what to say. Adeoti's hand trembled at his sides. His throat was dry as dust. The wind howled through the trees, carrying whispers of unseen spirits. Morenike stood still, her posture straight, her head slightly tilted as though she were listening to something only she could hear. The figure beside her remained unmoving, his presence unnerving. Adeoti could feel something ancient pressing against his skin, like unseen hands testing his soul. "I asked you a question, Adeoti of Konsole." The figure spoke again. "Why have you come?" Adeoti struggled to find his voice. He wanted to demand that Morenike return home, to remind her that she was his wife, that she belonged to him, but something in the air warned him that arrogance would not serve him here. Instead, he swallowed his pride and spoke softly. "I have come to take my wife home." At this, Morenike finally turned, and when her eyes met his, Adeoti felt the full weight of his sin. Gone was the woman who once looked at him with warmth, with hope. Instead, her gaze was cold, distant, like the river had done, beautiful but untouchable. "You have come to take me home?" she repeated, her voice eerily calm. "And which home would that be, Adeoti?" The house where I was nothing but a shadow? The place I was treated as an intruder in my own life? Adeoti flinched. He had expected anger, but this was worse. This was emptiness. Orenike, he whispered, stepping forward. Aye. Enough! The cloaked figure raised a hand, and Adeoti's feet froze in place, as though the earth itself had taken hold of him. You do not understand, Adeoti, the figure continued. Morenike no longer belongs to your world. Adeoti's heart pounded. What does that mean? She's my wife. She belongs with me. Morenike let out a soft, bitter laugh. Belong, she echoed. You speak of belonging as though I was ever truly yours. She took a slow step towards him, her gaze never leaving his. Tell me, Adeoti, do you remember the night you said you would rather have died than be in my debt? His mouth went dry. He did remember, and now standing before her, the weight of his words crushed him. Morenike turned to the cloaked figure. Tell him, she said softly. The figure nodded. When a person is cast aside, when their heart is shattered beyond repair, the spirits listen. Morenike was never meant to wither under your cruelty. She was chosen for something greater. Adeoti's breathing grew uneven. What are you saying? The wind around them grew stronger, the river's surface rippling as if something beneath was stirring. I'm saying, the figure whispered, that Morenike is no longer yours to claim. A sudden gust of wind swept between them, and in an instant Adeoti saw something that made his knees buckle. Morenike's feet were no longer touching the ground. She hovered like slightly above it, her toes barely grazing the earth, her form glowing faintly in the dim light. The river behind her shimmered with a strange otherworldly glow. Adeoti shook his head, panic rising in his chest. No, no, this can't be. Morenike, you belong in Konsili. With me, you are my enough. Her voice was sharp now, like the crack of thunder. You had years to see me. You had years to love me, and you chose hatred. You chose resentment, and now I have been chosen for something greater than you. Tears burned at the back of Adeoti's eyes, but he refused to let them fall. Don't leave me, he whispered. Morenike looked at him one last time, and for a brief moment, he saw something flicker in her eyes, a trace of sadness, of longing, but it was gone as quickly as it came. The spirits have given me a new path, she murmured, and I will walk it. With that, she turned away, walking towards the river. The cloaked figure followed, his presence growing fainter. Adeoti tried to move, tried to call out, but his voice caught in his throat. The last thing he saw before the river swallowed them was Morenike's silhouette, dissolving into the mist like a forgotten dream. Then all was silent. Adeoti fell to his knees, his body trembling as the river's mist coiled around him like the ghostly figures. He reached out, but there was nothing to hold on to. Morenike was gone, not stolen, not taken, gone by our own choice. The weight of it crushed him. He had spent years despising the woman who had only given him love. He had pushed her away, made her feel unwanted, unworthy, until she had truly become something beyond his reach. For hours he sat by the river bank, staring at the water, hoping, but the river was silent. The spirits had made their decision. When he finally rose, his body ached, his heart even more so. He made his way back to Konsili, but the grand house that once felt too small for his pride now felt too large for his loneliness. Days passed. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. People whispered as they saw him walking through the village, his once proud shoulders hunched, his face hollow. He no longer attended great gatherings, no longer boasted about his wealth. One day, he visited Yeye again, kneeling before her shrine. Tell me, he begged, his voice barely a whisper. Will I ever see her again? The old diviner shook her head, sorrow in her eyes. Morenike has become part of something greater than you or I, she murmured. You cannot summon her back. You cannot undo what is done. Adeoti closed his eyes, swallowing the grief that bound his truth. But Yeye continued, you are still here, and the spirits do not leave a man breathing if he has no purpose left. Adeoti looked up. What purpose do I have without her? Yeye studied him for a long time before speaking. Perhaps, she said softly, your purpose is to finally learn what love truly means. For the first time in his life, Adeoti had no answer. He left the shrine, the weight of his guilt heavier than any wealth he had ever carried. And as he walked through the village that night, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying a single familiar voice, soft, fleeting like a dream. Goodbye, Adeoti. He stopped, his heart hammering, but when he turned, there was only the wind, only the moon, only the emptiness she had left behind. And so the wealthiest man in Konsule, the man who once had everything, learned the one truth he had spent his life avoiding. The greatest loss is not riches, nor land, nor power. The greatest loss is the love you never learned to cherish until it is far beyond your reach.
With a heart aglow, she dances with the spirits in the moonlit night. Her beauty and grace, a mesmerizing sight. Oh, Jubosmiles